From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm NewsChannel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. Finding a way to restore civility or bring it back to our politics has been a topic of discussion for the past couple of years. Are we making any progress? Or is our political discord and polarization getting worse on a national, state, and local level? Is the pandemic playing a role in that? Are misinformation efforts adding to those problems? One of those here in Nashville leading the effort to try to find some stability in our politics has been David Plaza. He's the Opinion and Community Engagement Director at the Tennessean and USA Today Tennessee. David, thank you for joining us. You're our guest this week on Inside Politics.
No, it's my pleasure, Pat. I'm so glad to be here with you.
First, when we start this discussion, let's get a definition of terms. When we say we need more civility in our politics, what do we mean and what are we trying to achieve?
Sure. I mean, for me, civility is about being a good citizen. It doesn't mean we have to agree on all matters. It means that we are respectful to each other, that we seek to listen to each other, and also create a format where we are participating actively in civil discourse. And it takes time. It's hard because people want immediate results. But the question is, if we can create some kind of format where we are taking into account all voices, taking into account people's stories, it makes for much better conversations, be it about very tough issues like the presidential election or an issue like vaccine hesitancy, for example, which has come up recently.
Are we making any progress? You've been talking about this issue for at least a couple of years, and if we are making progress, where are you seeing it?
Sure. I think at the very micro level, we're making a lot of progress. And when it comes to people participating in local government, school board, metro council, there's a lot of healthy discussion, a lot of healthy discourse on the future of the city. And again, these are not things that are that people are necessarily going to be unanimously in agreement with, but they're things that can really move the envelope forward. One key local issue is what is the future of 2nd Avenue after the bombing from Christmas Day. And there's a Blue Ribbon Committee that's gotten together that is going to make those decisions. And there are going to be a lot of contentious conversations, but that's okay. The question is, what kind of vision can we create consensus around so that we can have a really wonderful and prosperous avenue again?
The pandemic has been raging for over a year. Would you agree that it seems to have exposed every division and every inequality in our society?
Yes, I would. And in my interviews with many people over the last year, I've been hosting a podcast with over 100 guests, and it's that very thing. It's exposed disproportionate levels of lack of access to health care, to good housing, to quality wages. For example, we see essential workers are predominantly people of color. We have many women who are in those fields as well, who have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And so this has certainly exposed those disparities. And also it's created conversations around, what are some of the best ways to treat people? How do we really address systemic racism in a way that's meaningful? So it's also created opportunities to have better healing conversations about reconciliation and reckoning that are uncomfortable, but at the same time are really necessary.
You might have thought the threat of this deadly disease might have found a way to bring us together, not divide us further, yet our responses seem to have created just more political discord. Why is that happening?
Well, I think there's always been political discord, in this country. We certainly have had a partisan process for centuries. But in many ways, there are things that we do agree upon. In many cases, people do want to be healthy. They do want to be secure. They may have some very different ideas. There are some areas where I'm very concerned about, though. When it's come to issues of wearing a mask, there are people who have concerns about the science, and obviously one should be reading, one should be as informed and educated as possible, but we know these things work. And unfortunately, that's been politicized, and it's taken people dying. It's taken more than 500,000 people dying in this country for some people to realize this, in fact, is a threat. One of the really wonderful things, though, is that we've seen the vaccination rates just increase. 20% of Americans are now vaccinated, and it's still a long way from herd immunity, but we're getting there, and people are finally heeding the call. We've recently published op-eds, for example, one by Hal Lawton of Tractor Supply Company, who is doubling down on the effort to get people in rural Tennessee vaccinated and across rural America. Those are areas where there's been a lot more hesitancy. And in some cases, it's because of trust in government. In some cases, it's because of lack of access, some of the issues that you talked about, those disparities. But we're finally having a more unified effort of getting that message out to urban areas and to rural areas.
On so many issues surrounding the vaccine and the virus and and the so-called stolen 2020 election and the QAnon conspiracies, there seems to also be so many organized, in many cases, disinformation campaigns, and people seem to believe in them and they don't want to change their minds. How do we move towards political civility when we can't even agree on the facts or what is really actually reality?
That's a very good question. It's a very difficult one to answer, and I'm in frequent contact with people, even post the election. The election was not stolen. The election was a fair election. It's been affirmed by the courts. It's been affirmed by the Congress. And, as journalists, we have to tell the truth. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes people want to push back on that. And I think sometimes it takes an approach that's a little bit empathetic to try to understand, why do you believe in certain conspiracies? And that can be tough. To try to address it with tremendous amounts of kindness if you can. There is the temptation to want to just, be aggressive about it, but that approach typically doesn't tend to work. People tend to dig in when you start attacking them because they may feel attacked for their values or the beliefs. And it takes time, patience, but also a unified effort. And I think for the most part, most Americans are convinced. More than 80 million people voted for President Biden, and most Americans are convinced that we have to fight and defeat COVID-19, that we have to move forward, that people deserve a certain sense of relief. And I think one of the messages that's really important is that even though politicians may be at each other's throats, Americans tend to be unified on wanting to have good jobs, wanting to be healthy, and at the same time wanting to contribute to their communities.
Let's move to the Tennessee General Assembly, where there has been seems to be almost an ongoing effort to declare war by the Republican supermajority against the state's transgendered citizens, especially the young people. When you talk to people up there on the other side, why is it so important that the GOP wants to get involved in this issue, not just here, but across the country?
The sad answer is I don't know. I've asked this question. I've published op-eds by people in the transgender community who are not being listened to. They're not in the room when this legislation, which is really harmful, is being considered or passed. Like the ban on transgender girls participating in youth athletic sports, or the essential erasure of LGBTQ people from the textbooks across Tennessee. This is targeting a vulnerable population with very little political power, and the only thing I can say is that they're doing it because they can. I mean, it is in many ways. I don't know if they realize it's harmful. Do they not care? But ultimately, because they don't have, and this is why it's so important for people to be involved in the political process, to get their voices heard and push back on these issues. Now, there have been efforts from organizations like the Nashville LGBTQ Chamber. There have been multiple businesses that have said this could be really bad for business in the future. And I think it's important for people to constantly remind and tell the stories of people who may not have the power that these legislators do to do this kind of harm. Part of it may be fear, part of it may be political opportunity. There have been some theories that it appeals to the base, but I don't really understand that. It truly is just harmful to individuals who are just trying to live their life and who are especially disproportionately susceptible to self-harm and suicide and so forth.
David Plaza is with the Tennessee, and he's the opinion editor, along with the community engagement director there, along with USA Today Tennessee. Back to continue our conversation with David after you watch these messages.